Well, thank you, Leela. That was a fantastic presentation and lots of really good information in there. So I've got some questions that came out of it, if you don't mind.
Of course.
It was very interesting, the difference between the passive and active candidates, because I thought it would be a far bigger gap. For example, you said like I think it was 60% of passive candidates do actually go and visit a corporate website looking for jobs. That seems incredibly high when you think passive is almost like maybe do something, maybe not, but that does seem quite a high figure.
Yes, I agree, Mike. I mean, this is something that we were, frankly, also quite surprised to see the prevalence of passive candidates using mobile technology to sort of check in on careers. But I think that's symptomatic of the way of the world, if you will. I think it's actually quite difficult to be a super passive candidate today just because relevant opportunities are being put in front of you all the time. And so I think we've entered a world in which, the largest percentage of passive candidates are sort of open. They're not looking, but if approached, then with something relevant, they'll actually be quite happy to have a conversation. So I think we're seeing a bit of blurring of worlds, if you will, and as a result, passive candidates are, in fact, sort of doing some light browsing and sort of clicking around, especially on the go, while they're bored on their commute or whatever it happens to be. So yeah, it's very interesting to see how things are changing.
Yeah, because I guess like years ago, they would actively have to go and buy a magazine or look in the newspaper to look for a job advert. But like you say, through social media and different channels, they've got no choice but to be presented. It's in front of them, and naturally, all they need is a click, and they're there looking, aren't they?
That's right, and even 10 years ago when job boards came online, you still had to actually go to the physical job board site. In other words, be consciously looking in order to actually see things that might appeal. But again, in fact, we see this at LinkedIn frequently with our jobs you may be interested in module that pops up on the home page. You may have noticed it before. 50% of our applications through LinkedIn are through that module, not from people and through sort of related technologies that put opportunities in front of people rather than people actually going to search. So we're seeing that very clearly in the dynamics on our site.
Well, I guess that goes to prove that companies, if they have vacancies to fill, they definitely need to be on social because their message will be shared everywhere, not necessarily with people going to whatever the central hub is. Like you say, 50% of people saw it elsewhere, but they're still generating applications.
Yeah, and that's actually been a boon for smaller organizations because they don't necessarily have the brand recognition that somebody would go off and look for them, and yet they may have the perfect job for an individual. And through social profiles, it's much easier these days to put relevant content in front of people because we know so much about them. So it's definitely something I'm seeing pay off for SMBs, as we call them over here in the States.
Right. The other chart I found very interesting was the tablets versus the different sort of devices in terms of the activities that are carried out. Obviously, the tablet is a bigger size device, so they're more likely to browse perhaps in front of a TV or in a different place. But was that a surprise to you, that the sort of activity that people do on the different devices?
Yeah, it wasn't so much a surprise. I mean, I think it makes sense just because the bigger screen does enable all sorts of different activity. I mean, it's quite painful frankly, to navigate complicated websites on a small screen. But once you have that just a slightly bigger view, then I think it becomes much easier and much more enjoyable, if you will. So it was. I think it was more confirmation of something that made sense theoretically, if that makes sense. I mean, I think the thing that is interesting is just the trends in terms of when people are using these different devices. So, and we've seen this before at LinkedIn, just what we call the coffee and couch phenomenon, where people are looking at, they're going onto their tablets nights and weekends, and first thing in the morning, and then it dips during the day, whereas smartphones a bit more consistent throughout the day, as I said. So I think that's a fascinating concept, and it does mean that people are looking at career information at all kinds of strange hours of the day, and certainly not that 9 to 5 window that you might have expected in the past.
Yeah, and I think it also shows that companies need to be geared up because people will change the type of device they use depending on the time of day. So if you start off your job search journey on your mobile in the morning, you could end up on the desktop and then on the tablet in the evening. They'll still be looking at the same job, but there needs to be consistency in terms of how they view it.
Exactly, and that's why mobile responsive design, I think, is becoming more and more important, because you want that consistency of experience, and you never know where your candidate's going to be checking you out from. So yeah, I think it's really important.
And in terms of like where people go through the apply process, I don't know if it's with yourself, but can you start to apply, say, first thing in the morning, and it saves where you are in the job application process, and you can come back later and actually continue that journey on a different device?
I think you can, yes. Depends on where you're applying from, but I think most folks, most sites will allow you to save that process. But you know, I still think that a lot of companies are missing a trick here, just because the apply process is so cumbersome, and that's you know, companies are going to have to sit back and take a long, hard look at what they really, really need from someone in order to consider them either a you know, full-blown applicant, or somebody that has indicated strong enough interest that they can move forward through a recruiter. So that's the piece of the puzzle that sadly is not it's not necessarily technology driven. It's really driven by company policies, and how can they lighten up the apply flow without feeling that they're compromising too much.
Yeah, and I think what you said there, what companies really need, and I think that maybe is part of the problem, not the process. It's the actual process. They're almost trying to fit the existing recruiting process into a mobile process, rather than saying, if we could start all over again with mobile, what's the minimum we need to make that connection possible, so we can actually attract the right people and start a conversation with them.
Yeah, it's funny. There's a gentleman who shall remain nameless, but he's the talent acquisition lead at a very prominent company here in the States, and I've heard him present at a couple of mobile conferences, and he said with pride that they've basically taken their existing apply process with 41 questions or something crazy, and they've basically just put that into mobile devices, and they are seeing applicants, but I would question what sort of applicants they're seeing, because, you know, if we go back to what we were talking about with passive talent being sort of all the rage, and less passive, more and more interested, that's a lot of very talented folks out there on the marketplace. But you know, the fact of the matter is they are still passive. They're mostly sort of semi-happily employed, and they're actually not the ones that are going to jump through the hoops and the multiple screens and the 41 questions to get to just, you know, the pleasure of submitting an application. And so I think it's a false sense of security, even if your numbers do look good. I think it really dictates the type of candidate you're going to be getting into the pipeline.
Yeah, absolutely. It's what comes out the other end, and how many hires and you make, and what the quality of hire is as well, isn't it?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, it's not that companies have a shortage of applicants. Let's face it, right? Many companies are just inundated with applicants. Unfortunately, the extent to which those applicants actually match what they're looking for is the thing that's often in question. And so I think if you slap your existing process onto into mobile devices, then you're not going to be getting additional quality applicants, I would say, by doing that.
Yeah, absolutely. And what's interesting, another chart that you showed in terms of the readiness for mobile recruiting, and it was quite shocking, really, that 49% of the people surveyed said they're not a top priority in terms of strategy. Yeah.
It's troubling, Mike. I'll be honest. I mean, we've been running this research for 3 or 4 years. I'd say we did see a small jump in mobile numbers maybe a couple of years ago, but it's been flat the last couple of years, relatively speaking, in terms of the extent to which companies feel like they're really addressing this opportunity head on. And I think it's, on the one hand, I definitely feel for talent acquisition leaders, because it's not as if additional budget miraculously materialized for them to take this on. But on the other hand, I think we're seeing the savviest of them be enterprising, look around the company, see who they can partner with to bring a more mobile-friendly recruiting process to bear. And so it's, I know recruiting teams are forced to do more with less quite often, and this is just another instance of that. But I do think it's really important, and hopefully that message of, the sheer desperation of candidates in the process, hopefully that gets through, and companies do start embracing this and running at it.
Yeah, because you used the word desperation there. That came across in the comments and the feedback that you had from the mobile users. Certainly, I've stopped applying for this particular company because if they can't invest in the technology, they obviously don't want me.
That's right. It's I think you are running that risk these days. The less you focus on mobile, the more that your candidates will take that as a sign of your progressiveness and your interest in working with them.
Yeah, because you touched on the email as well in terms of the clarity of emails and making sure they're delivered and they can be read on mobile devices. But I think that's an area that perhaps a lot of the companies haven't even thought through, the fact that they're sending out jobs by email every day, but the link goes straight to a non-mobile career site. So I guess there's only so much patience for the jobs you can have, because if they get an email every day and every time they click on the link and they can't actually go any further, then they're bound to get frustrated.
That's right. Yeah, I mean, it's one thing to optimize the actual message in the email itself, and I think that's really important, as I mentioned. But yes, you definitely have to take a look at where are you sending your people after they've, if they read that hopefully pithy email and decide, yeah, sure, I'll take a look at this, and then they click through and their experience is terrible. Well, that doesn't reflect terribly well on you.
Yeah. I know your number of LinkedIn visitors has certainly gone up. Is it 41%, I think, of mobile users now?
That's right, and it's higher in certain countries, as you can imagine. I mean, I think we're on the cusp of a mobile moment, basically, where the tipping point comes to life. But yeah, I mean, we've seen that number climb significantly quarter over quarter the last couple of years easily.
So when it does tip over, what's going to make the difference, do you think, in terms of recruiters? Will they finally get the message that they need to do something because more than half their traffic is now coming from a mobile device?
Yes, I mean, you'd hope that the tipping point would come sooner because, frankly, if 20 or 30% of your traffic is coming through mobile and you're not serving up a great experience, then you're clearly missing the chance to impress your candidates and welcome them into the fold. But I guess the more that percentage climbs, the harder and harder it becomes to ignore the inevitable, if you will. So yeah, I have to believe that when that 50%, and I think it is a when rather than an if, when that 50% arrives, they have no choice but to hopefully get on with it and make sure that they're thinking in a mobile-first way.
Yeah, the examples you gave of the Starbucks. What were the other two companies? The Starbucks.
So we did some work with Starbucks, with Prudential Financial, and also
right, yeah.
Abbott. Yeah. And I think I called out McDonald's as well as having a nice experience too.
That's right, yeah. Because I guess it's companies learning from other companies at the moment, isn't it? Because there's no sort of template in place in terms of this is what you must follow. It's finding out what others are doing and trying to adapt it to your own way. Is that what you're finding?
Yes, and it's amazing. There hasn't actually been a lot of benchmarking done, and actually that's probably something my team and I could work on now that you mention it. But yeah, I mean, I think it's still a little bit, for all the fact that this is inevitable and we're seeing more and more traffic, it still feels a little bit Wild West and new out there. And so I think, the answer could be as simple as having someone on your team spend half a day to a day actually going out and looking at other companies' mobile experiences. And I think obviously your awards will highlight some companies that are doing great things. If you just Google mobile recruiting, then you'll find some other examples. And so I think there's no substitute for probably just getting on your tablet or your phone and experiencing those and seeing what works and what doesn't. And hopefully that gives you some ideas for how you might think about reimagining your candidate experience on mobile. Absolutely, yeah. Now you mentioned during the presentation about taking easy steps, and that's perhaps choosing one part of your business to actually try mobile. I think that's very good advice, actually, because sometimes if you've got tens of thousands of jobs, it's going to be a big project to suddenly mobilize everything. But by doing it step by step, you can see how it works and tweak it and actually change it going forward. Are you aware of many companies that have started down that route? Not with mobile, not specifically, but I will say that in talking with recruitment leaders over time, it's clear that the smartest ones think about piloting, partly because it's easier to get buy-in from the executives as well. If you try something and it works, then, and also just getting buy-in for a small sort of incremental step as opposed to wholesale change is much easier, especially when there isn't a lot of budget to play with. So I've seen that work time and again for leaders, just generally speaking, when they're trying to innovate within the recruitment space. But yes, I mean, I think for mobile as well, it does make sense. And in the meantime, as I think I mentioned, I mean, sites like ours, and it's not just ours, of course, but the bigger social platforms and sort of bigger bigger aggregators have all been thinking mobile for a while, and so I think any company should be looking at that through the lens of what can I do, whether for free or at nominal cost, to start building a mobile presence, even if it's not my site, if it's other places where my opportunities show up and where my employer brand is on display. What should I be doing in those channels to make sure that even while I get my ducks in a row, I've still got a sort of fairly meaty mobile presence?
Yeah, absolutely. That's very good. Well, thank you very much again for all the time and effort you put into the presentation and joining me afterwards for the question and answers. And I'll get a prediction from you. When do you think it will go 50%?
I don't know that we're allowed to be in the business of predictions. I'd say, the rate that we've been growing, I would say, by mid-year next year, I'd be very surprised if we weren't there. But that's one person's opinion, just so you know, not the opinion of LinkedIn. So.
No, well, I will take that one person's opinion on board, and perhaps we can talk again when it happens.
Sounds like a plan, Mike. Thanks so much.
Yeah. Anyway, thanks very much for your time.
Absolutely.
And all the best.
Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.